But yeah, so I retrained my young mind. But I still respond strongly to it.
It makes everything more memorable too.
That one's
It's 6:29, if that's what.
I'm going, where's the clock around here?
Clocks or not.
One, two, three, 5, attorney, city manager, presenter, so I think we're good. 6:30?
6:30.
Welcome, everyone. It is May 15th, a study session. And first, happy birthday to Mr. Baker today.
Thank you.
And happy birthday to Mark yesterday.
Thank you.
So there's plenty of cake everywhere if anybody goes to. So first up, Wida.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, councilors, this is a update on the downtown. We a little bit delayed than what we originally projected of early April. And we're very pleased to present this back to you and bring it back to you. But tonight is purely informational. It's an update. We're not asking for guidance or decisions at this point, but certainly happy to field questions that you may have. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Economic Development Director, Lindsay Kimball. So Lindsay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. All right, good evening, Anita, board members. I'm Lindsay Kimball, your Economic Development Director, and with me tonight, I have John Burke, Economic Vibrancy Manager. He and I will be walking through the presentation tonight. Also joining us in the audience is our team of professionals that support the downtown development, each lending their own unique talents and skill sets to this project. With us tonight, we have Mona Chori, our Senior Management Analyst, Malcolm Murray, our outside legal counsel, Mary Beth Jenkins from the Laramie Group, our retail and real estate consultant and expert, John Mullins, who is with us virtually, is our financial consultant, Bob Meyerhoff, the city's treasury manager, Cherie Sanchez, our accounting manager, and Vicki Adams, our business operations administrator. We thank them for helping us in addition to all of the departments that are so vital to the success of downtown. It is an enormous team effort. And as you know, the city began the redevelopment of the former regional mall nearly 15 years ago. This project from the beginning was big, bold, and complex. We will present you with a review of how much progress has been made and what we see on the horizon in terms of downtown development. To prepare for tonight, we have run through a rigorous exercise with our city finance and accounting professionals, as well as our outside financial consultants, to give you the clearest and most up-to-date view of our financials. These numbers are very solid, and so is the benefit to the community. In a qualitative and aesthetic sense, that we are engaged in placemaking and community building is just as equally important to us, building that place, building that beautiful community, as are the dollars and cents, and we believe we're exceeding in both areas. 15 years ago, the city saw a dying mall and engaged proactively to revitalize the site, build a new neighborhood, and to date, attract approximately $350 million in private investment. Before I turn it over to John Burke, we just ask respectfully that you please hold your questions to the end, and we'll be happy to address them at that time. Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. John Burke, Economic Vibrancy Manager for the City of Westminster. So tonight, I'm going to share with you a little bit of the background, discuss some of the implementation of downtown, and I'll turn it back over to Lindsay to walk through some of the dollars and cents. And again, our team is going to be here to answer questions that you have after the presentation. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the history of downtown Westminster, the former Westminster Mall, 1.2 million square feet. But it's critical to the story. You know, like many of you, I grew up in the area, going to the mall and hanging out, and that really was a community. That was where we met. That's where we met other people, and that's my wife and was working in the mall, I think, back in the day as well. She was. And so that really was the focus of this community, as a regional destination, and that's where we all started. When I started working in the city in 2004, the mall was anything but magical back then. It was dying, as many malls across the U.S. Currently are and continue to be. But it was on the decline. In fact, I think by 2004, the sales tax revenue was less than 10% of where it was when it peaked earlier in its lifespan. It was during this time that the city invested in other locations such as the Promenade, Walnut Creek, and Orchard Town Center. It was these strategic moves that allowed the city to take a bold move and reinvest in the former mall site by acquiring the mall from 2009 through 2011. So you can see Macy's, Mervyn's, Sears, Dillard's, AMC, they had all closed by this time, which then launched us right into a public visioning session to ask our residents, what do you want to see out of this 100-acre site that's now dormant and vacant? With that, you see the infographic that quite candidly we've been using ever since. This was developed by hundreds of hours of community engagement and input to identify what does this downtown Westminster want to be when it grows up. Some of the general projections you see on the right are nearly mirroring some of the current market conditions that we're seeing bring to the downtown Westminster site. Somewhere upwards of ultimately 2 to 3 million square feet of office can be accommodated on this location. 45 to 5,000 residents can also live here, work here, play here. 500,000 square feet of retail, plus or minus. I think on the infographic we show 750,000. Again, these are targets. As market demand is there, this is what we're going to react to bring to the downtown Westminster site. 300 plus hotel rooms. We currently have 125 key boutique hotel. We also, a couple years ago, got an entertainment district allowed on the downtown site, so hopefully bring that to fruition later this year. Because the WIDA owns the land, we're also able to require that all the buildings are LEED Silver certified. One of the important elements of that is the reduction in water consumption of those buildings. As evidence, I think in one of our prior presentations, one of the current buildings that opened up is using about 43% less water than anticipated because of some of those water fixtures inside that building, which is a key element to the long-term sustainability of the downtown site. In addition, this is a transit-oriented development with access to mass transit. The recently completed and hopefully grand opening here soon, Sheridan Underpass, it'll get direct connectivity from downtown Westminster to the US 36 Sheridan Station, which gives you a 15-minute ride on the Flatiron Flyer to Denver Union Station, and about a 25-minute ride to Boulder with a couple stops along the way. I'm going to kind of walk through where we've been over the past few months, trying to identify each and every block in downtown and what it could be. Aligning that with the previous slide with that infographic that shows what the full build-out condition could be. And so with that, we're going to walk through each one of these categories. The first being cultural. You'll see a couple blocks we've identified. Backing up a little bit, a few months ago we hired Davis Architectural consultants to help us identify how do we get from where we are today to the full build-out. We're about 30% as far as the land is concerned currently. So we took that information, went block by block. The amazing team that's sitting here behind me tonight, along with Lindsay, literally took a deep dive in each one of those and said, what do we think could be on each of these sites? So the first was cultural. One of those key elements, maybe on Westminster Boulevard in Harlan, where that triangular piece of property is, that might be a really fun future public library. Could be, some entertainment concepts with the city, art galleries, things of that nature, as well as D3 over on closer to Sheridan Boulevard. That's another thing. We hired a consultant a few years back to identify what are the gaps as far as any cultural elements are concerned. So again, could be art gallery, could be some cultural, some different civic uses within that building as well. The next item we identified was retail. What you see initially highlighted, we currently have JCPenney, which is one of the legacy businesses on site when they're doing great. Bolero, which is also on site that shows up. Then we have Marzek Fine Foods, Alamo Draft House, and then another future kind of standalone retail over on 92nd Avenue, kind of spreading that across the site. And again, these are all very much potential as market conditions will inform us down the road. The next one is office. Again, most of the office buildings will be along that US 36 because of height and visibility. We also have a couple infill wraps around the buildings. Hotel, we have the current Origin Hotel, the 125 key. We've also seen that D1 block, which is right on 88th, Sheridan and Eaton Street, is a really strong piece of property for the city and we, as we hold on to that for our future hotel, could be a mixture of uses on that site as well, but that is a really key location. A lot of the developers that we've talked to said, please let me know when that piece of land is available, because that is absolutely amazing. Next one, we're showing some parking, again, with the shared parking in the downtown. We have the existing nearly 900 stall parking garage on C2, and then a future one that's behind the Alamo Draft House. Next, we show rental residential. Again, we have majority of the development currently on site is rental. And then the next one we're also showing is future for sale, which would be a mixture of townhomes and condominiums on the site. What's also important as we went through this exercise, we started to identify, how does this integrate into the surrounding community? The last thing any of us want to do is drive by and feel like you're going down a canyon of development. So along 92nd Avenue, you start to see the development tier and kind of step down. In fact, the future townhomes on 92nd and Eaton are a two-story element that will very much mirror what's along the north side of 92nd Avenue. But it's also important to note that along Westminster Boulevard that turns into Harlan, with the elevation, there's already a three-story office building on that side. And so again, we don't want the downtown site to look diminished in response, but also integrated into the adjacent neighborhoods. With all this input, we then took every single block with the types of uses that we've identified, from grocery to townhomes, the active adult project, and literally put down when we think we could bring those to market with development partners. Again, being very realistic. None of us expected to go through COVID 5-6 years into the project. We're now reacting to that. What does that mean? Office is still uncertain. That is likely going to push out a little bit further than we initially hoped, even though we had initial deals that made a lot of sense. We will be always reacting to that and bring every single project to this board for their review. Nothing happens in a vacuum with this development. And so every one of these projects we've identified is kind of our best certainty guess of what that's going to look like down the road, from, again, condos, apartments, townhomes, and office. Why this is important, I've kind of blacked out the developments that are already under construction, completed, and open, is this is what informed us into the financial model. So we, in some of the attachments that you saw in the memo itself, we've kind of have a break point, of not a break point, but identified where we are from 2009 to 2022. So we've captured everything that's in the pipeline. That's basically what's blacked out. Those are actuals. Again, the team behind me that's ran through all the details and numbers, sifted every possible WIDA, URA, WERP account for the downtown and put it into that bucket. So that's what you're seeing. We can tell you with complete certainty that everything from 2022 to 2009 is 100% in the book that's been validated. And Larry's team as the CFO has been able to accomplish exactly that. Everything from 2023 forward is our best guess as market conditions will allow. That's what this graph is starting to show you on those dates as we bring forward. Why is that important? That's what informed us on how to build this financial model that Lindsay's now going to share with you. So I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Great, thank you, John. And exactly, as John said, those projections are what helped inform this financial model. Projecting from 2009 to 2022, which we know for certain, with full certainty, and then moving forward with our best estimates and I will also emphasize, very conservative estimates and planning procedures when we put these numbers together. It's important to note that while there were obviously acquisition costs, as you can see in the expense side, associated with the land and construction costs, associated with things like roads and parking garages and sidewalks, the land is an asset that's on the city's ledger, and generally, most of the time, land does not ever depreciate, it increases in value, so you can also think of that as an asset. Also, while there are construction costs for public infrastructure, these do have value. The parking garage has a value. Our streets and our parks have value that we've built downtown. Now, they do depreciate over time, but they have a value. And it's also important to note they're just like infrastructure the city builds and maintains throughout any other neighborhood or commercial area, any part of our city. We still provide these services and these assets and infrastructure. I also want to note on the revenue side, we have that GID, which was put in place. It's only applicable to downtown properties, so just want to make sure that's really clear. It doesn't apply to any properties outside of our downtown area. It's currently approved by by City Council for 35 mills, and this is a self-funding mechanism that was put in place. It helps provide for operations and maintenance, things like snow removal, landscaping, trash removal, roadway maintenance, those sorts of ongoing expenses that we have. So it's a self-funding mechanism. The second item that I do want to point out is the line on revenues for net property tax increment of approximately $147.6 million. That is the URA. That property tax increment does sunset in 2038, so it will have a lifetime of 25 years. But the last collection is in arrears, so our collection is being shown in 2039. So we just wanted to make that clear if there were any questions about that. We, again, have been very conservative with these estimates, and even with that protocol, we are still showing a $206.6 million revenues over expenses to the city. So we're quite pleased with that. Our next slide here is a visual depiction of our revenue categories, which you saw on the previous slide. And within the schedule, that is that attachment John referred to earlier. It's attachment to the memo in your packet. The important things we want to highlight here are, of course, noting the ramp up with property tax and GID, sales tax, commensurate with the impact of those development projects, private development projects, as they come online. Also, you can see depicted that drop-off that I have mentioned previously between 2039 and 2040 in property tax revenue as the URA sunsets in 2038. But notice beyond that, those streams of GID and sales tax revenue and our base property tax still continue. They continue in perpetuity, and they're very healthy, and obviously they're much greater than where we were in 2009. Part of the, like we like to say, secret sauce of this project that makes it so special is that because we have a mix of uses built patiently over time, block by block, with multiple developers, just like with your financial portfolio, we are diversified. And we are building in resilience by, as you would say, not having all your eggs in one basket. We are trying to build a resilience against market shocks and changes and trends or tastes in shopping so that we can organically develop, and eventually in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, it'll redevelop again. But we hope we've put into place a perpetual motion. So it now, because it has grown block by block, it can redevelop, reinvest block by block as well, and it's a self-perpetuating mechanism. This obviously is very different from where we were in early 2000 with a regional mall, and we can continue to see that in contemporary time with things like Flatirons Mall, or really any of the malls around here are looking for ways to move and flex and change, but because they're bought into one type of built environment, it's definitely more challenging and more expensive to flex. Okay, so this slide represents where we project that we will break even on revenues and expenses. We're happy to report that even with the updates to reflect current development projects in the pipeline and the financial markets where they stand today, which is significantly different from where it was last year, we still show a break-even point in 2033. So we see that our policy to always model conservatively has been a wise choice. And unlike a private developer, the city didn't have to chase the latest, fastest, greatest development trend. The city didn't have to have a fire sale. We are able to be patient, which is why we were not pressured to have an earlier break point, but we still are quite proud of the 2033 break point. And of course, the good news is that projecting we will make $206.6 million over expenses by 2045. And that green line that you see that green line will continue to rise forever. And the red line is not going to be increasing as at the same rate. So that gap between those expenses and revenues are going to continue to become more favorable to the city. And as we've said earlier in the presentation, we've realized more than $350 million in private sector investments based on approximately $120 million in initial public sector investment in land, infrastructure, and other hard costs. So that's $120 million to currently $350 million of private sector investment. That's an excellent return. That return, as well as that, the green line you see there, the private sector investment causing that revenue is also going to exponentially increase. So, in 10, 15 years, we'll hopefully be here telling you we've got $800 million now leveraged against that 120 initial investment. So we think that's quite strong and a great outcome for this project. And like we said, the numbers are great. We are very proud of where we are. But as a tier 1 suburban community with high quality design standards and sense of place, this is also about further enhancing our community aesthetically and building community. So through placemaking, we're working to create beautiful public environments where people can connect. And we believe that's also a strong public purpose for our work, is helping to make our community stronger, more connected, and have more of these locations for people to have those connections. Okay, so some of the new developments that we are very excited about, most of these have come to our attention and fruition since the last time we updated you. So we're very excited. I'll start with the condos in the top left-hand corner there. We've got the Wind Flats. These are 20 condominium townhomes. They're at 90th and Westminster Boulevard. They'll be the first condominiums constructed within the city in well over 10 years due to complications that were previously existed around the Colorado Construction Defects Law. So
You just have to stop for a woo-hoo.
Thank you.
And I shared that with all the mayors I was with today, and they say woo-hoo. They're watching.
Thank you, Mayor. We also would like to talk about the townhomes. So we've got the Woonerf townhomes, which are 17 new for sale townhomes. These are the complement to the very successful and sold out townhomes on Harlan. We also have the townhomes on 92nd, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner with the pitched roofs, a little more chateau-looking design there. So these will be 31 new townhomes, located on the south side of 92nd Street. So these will be on 92nd. And as John had alluded to in the massing and the connection with its surrounding environment for the downtown development, we wanted to make sure we had that step down, of course, so it fit nicely and there was nice transitions. Those townhomes are really going to be a game changer, particularly aesthetically. As you drive down 92nd, it's really going to be compatible with that neighborhood across the street, as John said, that has those 2-story homes so as well that are established. So the project is currently in architectural review. WIDA approved the purchase and sale agreement on April 10th, 2023, and closing on the land is currently scheduled for this July. So we are excited about that, and we'll be excited to give you the groundbreaking invitations for that. We also have Marzak's Fine Food, which you can see in the right bottom corner. Marzak's, an amazing, local, authentic, 8,000 square foot grocer and wine store. The site work will begin this summer with an opening date to be determined this fall. So we are very excited about that, and they're underway. We also have the 55 plus active adults. We are hearing tremendous amounts of information about the aging of our population here in the metro area and in the entire state of Colorado. I recently was privileged enough to see our state economist, Elizabeth Gardner, present last week. She's always fantastic, but she really drove home the point that we've got this aging silver tsunami coming, and all of us in the room should be thinking about how are we going to help our population as it ages to stay in the community and have a quality place to live. So we're really excited about this 55 and up active adult product. It's going to have retail on the bottom that you can see there, restaurants, and We're very excited about that. That's from VH Companies and Vertical Collaborative. There'll be approximately 200 age-restricted units, and they're currently in architectural review. So that's another exciting project. And okay, we'll go on to the future. The future, we really want to emphasize that our structure that we have for downtown keeps City Council, WIDA, in the driver's seat. Each and every project that happens in downtown has come and will come to this board. This is very different than if we had sold the property entirely to a master developer, private sector developer. Project would have, for the most part, been out of our hands, and they would have been chasing, as we described in the beginning, that quickest, fastest way to, call it turning and burning, develop it, sell it, flip it, keep going. That wasn't the model that this community wanted to use. We are, of course, looking at office and looking at retooling office throughout the country, and especially with some of the things going on in financial markets now, interest rates, etc. There is a cool down that's not unique to Westminster, so we are looking at now seeking out those developers, establishing those relationships, building relationships, finding them wherever they are across the country, and telling them the story of Westminster and downtown Westminster. Because when you're in a down cycle, everything's a cycle in real estate, so when you're in the down cycle, it's really when you got to kick up the marketing efforts and get out there. So that's what we're focused on now, so that everyone knows our name. And in fact, in July, we're going to be hosting about 400 commercial real estate professionals in downtown, in the Market Hall area. And we're going to be telling them all about downtown, all about our past success and our future success that we hope to have. So that's an exciting opportunity. We hope you all will be able to join us. We also have Center Park there, which is our community gathering space, signature community space. It has flexibility, it's multi-tiered with event potential, and it's really the heart of downtown Westminster. Has an event lawn, multi-purpose gathering plaza, an iconic play feature, hillside lawn seating, water play feature, and much, much more. So stay tuned for that. That is very close to starting groundbreaking pretty soon. So we're excited about that. The future is unpredictable, and the benefit of the downtown specific plan, as we said, is that there's flexibility. But there is a definite plan in place. We know where we're going, we know where we need to go. We want to be able to meet future demand, styles, and expectations. And in all potential futures, again, City Council retains control of the development of downtown. Overwhelmingly, we want to add, you see the spot there for restaurants and amenities. We did an informal, unscientific survey of residents, visitors. We had the QR code, had it open for about a month. Got some great responses. And again, not scientific, but it's a survey. And we found overwhelmingly folks want more restaurants. They want more activation, more entertainment, nightlife, maybe a little bit of that. They want to be able to come down there and have fun. And we've seen in successful mixed-use operations throughout the country, it really is being driven now in this, in the past decade through restaurant experiences, through experiential retail. So we're going to be focusing with our professionals on that attraction as well. And with that, we are all here and happy to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Questions?
Of course. Okay, I assume that the land sales in 2023 are block C7?
Yes.
Okay. And the land sales in 2022 were of the Marzak and the other half of the Wound Nerf.
Yes. Yeah.
And the
A4
sales
East
in
and-
2021 were the first half of the Wound Nerf.
That'd be correct. And backing up on 2023, we also are planning for the active adult sale as well, which is on
Roy
Block
Vertical?
B5. Yes, that is correct. That is currently
So
planned for
between the
November.
both of them, it's only $330,000?
As
Mr.
you
Baker,
also-
or Counselor Baker, let him answer questions, so we don't talk over each other, please.
Yeah, let's look at those numbers real quick to make sure I'm not misspeaking. On 2023, I think our land sales are 335, so no, you are correct. That should only be for the C7 townhomes. So I
Okay.
think we pushed the Block B5 into 2024.
Verticals in 2024,
Yes. Now,
okay?
back to my,
Because it was what, $2 million?
yes, that is correct. There's just
Okay,
over
so the
200
other
acreage.
million and a half is,
If you'd like, we can go back to that other slide, because that's how it was built out. Let me look real quick.
well, that one was a good one.
Yeah. So I believe in this one, these are opening dates, so we'd have to back out. I believe it would have been the other condo project, if I'm not mistaken, might have been built into that number. Again, these are the, if you're looking specifically at land sales, all that was built into that model as to what the acreages were. And just to be very clear, we held the $25 a square foot across future sales moving forward.
Okay. And those condominiums you talked about are on A1?
They are on A1. You can see there's a 2026, if I'm not mistaken, opening, which would have been a sale in likely 2024, or a 2-year construction timeframe.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Why are we counting the GID revenue? Because none of that goes to the city. That is for that area only. It's not our money. It's no more our money than is the GID at Amherst, our money.
So I can lean on some of our team, but I'll do my best to answer that. So if you didn't have a GID established, you'd be using city resources to pay for the maintenance of those elements, such as the parks and streetscapes. So in essence, that GID offsets what the city would have otherwise had to pay for maintenance.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I asked the question, why are we counting the development fees in? So why didn't we count the development fees in from 2024 to 2039?
Great question. As of this point, we don't know what those developments look like, so I didn't want to kind of beef up the revenues on what-ifs projections. You'll also notice I didn't include any incentives from that same projection. The way that the offsets for any of the revenues in for development fees are typically provided for those first-in developers as incentives, which were rebates of some of those fees that, if not but for the development, the city would not have received. So from 2022 back to 2009, we offset those revenues in from the land sales, from the development review fees, that all then in some cases were also part of the incentives that show up as an expenditure in that same year.
That's interesting, too. And where do we stand with the food court?
The market hall that's in the Aspire project, sure. I can briefly answer that. And also, Mary Beth Jenkins is here, our retail consultant. In simple terms, the developer is still required to construct and open and operate a market hall in that space. As you may or may not be aware, the operator they had under contract that had leased that space was not able to perform. And so that team is now actively searching for a replacement operator for that space. In fact, I think there's been at least a dozen or so, and I'll just maybe look a nod, that they've talked to, and they are actively pursuing that to bring that market hall operator in. And hopefully by the next time we meet, I'll have more updates for you.
Okay. Those are all my questions.
And Counselor Eli?
That market hall operator, would they need to then, is there still development that needs to occur? Or would they need to, like, to fit in that space, would they need to do more development of that space?
If you're-
Before they can, or is it already developed?
Yeah, so if you're talking about tenant improvement work, and so right now it's a vanilla shell, so the infrastructure is there. but the market hall operator would have to come in partnership with the developer to build out that space. Initially, they're looking about 5 different restaurants and then a common beverage station. So all that has to still be built out before they can actually open up.
So the prior operator didn't do any of that work?
They had design plans, they actually, full architectural building, they had a building permit that was issued for that work, so they had actual costs that were developed over the past couple of years. Also, as you can appreciate with interest rates now, hovering over 8%, the cost to build that same space is significantly more expensive. And so it's a new play that they have to really struggle through, but they're actively doing it.
Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem.
First, to piggyback on what Councilor Zadi's talking about. So the original operator of that food corridor area, is that the same one that's downtown off of Wine Coop, or I'm trying to think what street. I was working in an office building for 3 months across from that. And so that used to be very popular, I'm told, by the company I was contracting with prior to COVID. They are still actively losing restaurants out of there because they don't have the foot traffic. So, and that's in a busy part of downtown. So I'm just curious, like, how we feel that's gonna, I mean, we were all very excited about getting that, concept there before. So, I mean, how is that market changing? Is it starting to come back, or are we?
I'll invite you, Mary Beth Jenkins with Laramie Company.
Mary Beth Jenkins with the Laramie Company. The whole retail world has changed since COVID. There is positive response to this market hall from the potential prospects we have spoken to. It's shifting a little. It could be more of a beer hall with less food operators. I think there were 8 or 9 food operators in that original market hall, but they see the potential, and it's really finding the right fit. I'd say we have one of the top restaurateurs in Denver looking at it. We have others that are very successful, and the Sherman and Associates companies, this is really their responsibility through their development agreement to perform. We could split it, but that's not really the wisest thing to do. I think with the common consumption, having a large area is important. It's used as co-working. Along with events, along with the flexibility that if a tenant doesn't work, it can be quickly repurposed. So it's a matter of time. It's 11,000 feet. It's a big tenant, and it's an expensive tenant to build out.
It's an exciting concept. I just, I guess I'm concerned to see where it goes if it couldn't survive in that part of downtown. Granted, that part of downtown has its own challenges that are a little different than ours.
We worked on the McGregor Square project, and that food hall is very successful. And it's successful because it has a very large bar area. It's had changeover since some of the initial tenants opened, but it's fully leased. And I believe there's 6 tenants and there's a great sushi restaurant, and there's an empanada. It didn't start that way. It actually moves a little more towards ethnic from the traditional that want to come in, and it solidifies. So you'll likely see a difference in some of the food operators, but at the end of the day, the paradigm really does work. Golden Mills is a great example if you've been over in Golden. And our food operator was actually the one that started the Stanley Marketplace, which is a very ambitious project.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
So moving on to something else that I've brought up in the past, and I was waiting for us to get to this update, and that's around us looking at mix of housing and density, and how much. I really want to know kind of how we're looking at, out of the multifamily rental, are we at the right number of units that we want there? How many affordable units are we hoping that we're gonna get? And I know that we're gonna do the housing assessment study for the whole city, but this being its own specific thing, I wasn't sure, are we going to kind of do a subset of that for the downtown? Or are you gonna look at that completely different? Because as we get closer to, starting to build stuff out, I think that we need to have those conversations about the affordable, what kind of affordable, how much affordable, and the same with just market rate rental. Well, and I mean, because market rate rental, that's, can be a lot of things, right? Like Park 1200 versus some of the other market rate rentals is very different market. Even the senior living that we're putting in there is higher end senior living, and so as we have that part of the discussion too, with, how much more senior are we gonna try to go after if we're down there? What kind of senior are we gonna go after? So I wanted to kind of get a sense of like, how is the team looking at those different things to make sure that we have the right mix down there, because I think success is all gonna be about mix, so that we have different options for different folks at different income and age brackets.
Sure, yeah. One of the things that we're most proud of the downtown project is our first in residential was an affordable project. And then continuing that theme, 10% of the next two buildings were set aside for affordable housing. So we've actually really been ahead of the curve on that in downtown, and we're very proud of that fact. I think as we move forward, and we look at these remaining units that we have capacity to build, we are looking at more of age mixes, so probably more of a senior, and then looking at, I think in these townhomes, those are gonna be more younger families being able to afford those townhomes. So always looking at keeping that balance. There's nothing hard and fast about this unit shall be affordable and this unit shall be this. But we always want to keep our eye on those needs of our community. And as you mentioned, the housing needs assessment, I think, is going to be very important to informing us, so we know where our gaps are, not just geographically, but within the spectrum of incomes. As you look at incomes, from the past study, we could see there were great disparities along the working family sector, and then there's a huge gap for the folks who are 30% or 40% of AMI. And we had a glut of luxury units, as you mentioned. Some of the things being built now are renting for $4,000 a month. It's hardly affordable. And I think we're just gonna have to keep our finger on the pulse of what comes next in terms of multifamily. We are really excited about the condo prospect. Being the first out of the gate with these condos, it's a big deal. And we're gonna keep our foot on the pedal with that as well. So as I said, every project is going to come back to this body and to city council for approval. So as things come to fruition, as the market dictates and demand dictates, we're going to be bringing those forward. I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add.
No, that's exactly it. So I think the team is very interested. We want to make sure that we have a diverse offering of residential units on the site. So between the ownership and the rental, condos, townhomes, as you see, as we went through the build out, there's not a whole lot of area left for multifamily units. I think we identified maybe 3 blocks left for that, because that was kind of the first in, which I can't emphasize enough. Having rooftops or residents on site to support that retail, it is such a key element. And you might think to yourself, we have 1,000 people on the site. It's still not enough to sustain those small retailers. I mean, Superfruit Republic, they're in that space, they just opened up, they are struggling. They don't have that daytime foot traffic, people coming to visit them. So we absolutely have to bring those mixture of residential units to the downtown to support those retailers.
I appreciate all that, and I guess in that kind of does speak to where I'm driving, and this is my opinion, obviously, 1 out of 7 of us. But some of the concerns I've heard from the community, and this is one of those things where it's important that people understand that this all comes back to the body, because we've had so much talk about zoning and what's allowed, and that sometimes people look at what's allowed and think that we're gonna maximize that, and sometimes that's the right move, but I think that the takeaway for me looking at this that I could share back to some of the concerns I've heard. If you look at the way that you guys are transitioning, even 92nd, we were talking about that specific one over the weekend, because if I go back even 6 years to some of the concerns I heard before some of that started building out from that townhome community was exactly that. They didn't want to look across the street at high rises. So
Right.
Sure.
I think that transition if you expand that out into what else is gonna be built, if we're consistent with doing it that way, I think, you know, we'll end up with a really good product that matches what the existing community, you know, will be happy with, so. But I also am gonna be interested in that housing assessment, just because, you know, with us having limited space, what goes in for the rest of that, I think is gonna be of interest to all of us. So, but I appreciate the update as well, cause it's been a bit since we got something, even though we've had a lot before us, you know, that you've went through. And remind me again, just so, and I know it's in here, but Marzax, when do we think that's actually gonna open? Do we actually have like a month or?
We don't yet, my
No,
apologies.
still kinda
Yeah, I can't
moving.
remember how much I shared last time, but when they originally, the architect looked at that building, it was the former US Bank building that had a big vault. They were planning to remove the vault. Unfortunately, that vault is actually part of the structure that's holding the roof. So, they had a redesign. They originally had their kind of main entrance as a 45 right off that corner where the vault is. Now they're moving it back to almost where it is now. Great move, they'll integrate it in, so P. Marzak, his architectural team, they're fantastic, they're being very creative. So we had to go back, take a few steps back, and now they're advancing back forward.
It can be the wine cellar.
Yes, wine and cheese, 100%.
Great idea.
Perfect, thank you.
Pleasure.
Councilor Manumela.
It was really meant to be, because I remember that's what we said the vault should be at the very beginning.
Just on the market hall piece, I've been to a lot of market halls, and the latest one I went to, which I hadn't been to before, was the Edgewater Public Market, which seemed rather large, and so kind of curious to know how that's doing pretty decently in relation to, you know, some of these other ones. I mean, I think most of the Denver ones I've been to are still going pretty strong. And the one in Golden is too, so,
I was just there Friday with the Jeffco mayors, that's where we met. And you couldn't find a parking place on a Friday at noon.
yeah, that's what we want. But we'll have parking. And then, just a note about the affordable component. I know originally we were looking to achieve about 20% of the overall units as affordable, or 80% AMI, or some level around that. Obviously, we have some as low as 30, and the Eaton Street is mostly 60%, and Aspire and Ascent are at 80% AMI. I'd be, you know, as we talk about the diversity of units, maybe we also look at some attainable 80 to 120%, and that might be, you know, in terms of getting those projects off the ground, maybe it might be a little bit easier to do. I know there's less, you know, when you go above 60% AMI, your ability to find financing sources is a lot drier and more difficult. So I know we have a lot going on in terms of some state funding, but you know, if we're not participating in Prop 123, I don't, you know, some of that might be less easy to get a hold of. So anyway, attainable would be good. And then, and I'd still like to see 20%, but maybe it's more of a mix up to 120, and maybe we're more looking at 60 to 120% AMI and trying to hit that full range.
Okay.
And then I know you're trying to respond to the north side and scale down B7, but I looked it up. The drawing doesn't even match what our FAR requirements / frontage requirements are, i.e. it's not dense enough. It's not, it's an underwhelming entrance to the downtown. I would hope that at minimum, we're looking at 2-story building, ideally a 3-story building right at that corner. So let's not kind of sell ourselves out for, you know, we already have, across the street, we've got that. We can do a little bit better. So just would hope that you would reimagine what's happening on B7 and what could happen on B7.
Will do.
Okay.
Duly noted.
Okay.
Anything else? Are we talking with Jefferson County for a library, and where are we?
That's a great question. I don't know if you've talked to Tomas recently about that. The short answer is we have absolutely reached out to Jefferson County libraries in the past as our residents pay for
Yep.
a
And we
a
have
library,
none.
and
I've
we
lived
have
there
none.
45 years and we have none.
We would love, in fact, one of the renderings, that kind of triangular portion that I was showing on the cultural, that was, sorry, wrong way. That absolutely, I didn't bring my renderings of that, but truly, the corner of that could absolutely be part of that collaboration with Westminster and Jefferson County Public Library Systems for that space. We had some outdoor venues identified for that, so we would love it, Mayor. Absolutely. I know our residents, since they've been paying into it, would also love it.
And did they give you any answers or?
No, nothing. I think they had shifted their priorities to somewhere else in their district, but
Yeah, it
again,
was-
this dates back years now.
3 or 4, it must have been like 4 years ago. I think Jason Genk, the former Parks and Rec director, and I went and pitched it to Jeffco, and then they got back to us and they said, yeah, we're not making it a priority to put our resources there. And I think, you know, if we build something, maybe somebody will come. Because we could integrate that. If that's a project, we'd been looking at projects there that potentially could build out a civic space for us. And then if we could get it leased for, you know, whether it's anything or something, you know, it would have to be a partnership with a developer, hopefully some type of library provider, and us to make that happen.
To me, it sounds like we need to get the community engaged because they've been paying all of these years and our closest is Stanley Lake Library. So I'm willing to sick on the community to them. I know a couple of the board members start lighting fire under their little seats. Okay, anything else? Counselor Baker?
Yeah, I wanted to like explore the COPs a little bit more, okay? We're only putting interest in there, and you sent me the email. Could you verbally tell me what the email said?
Sure, I might turn it to Bob Byerhoff, if you don't mind, Bob. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Bob Byerhoff, Treasury Manager. And the email, what we did is the interest payments, we carried out through the term of the COPs, and the principal was allocated to the specific public projects, i.e. the parking garage, parks, the infrastructure. So rather than double counting it, those costs are baked into the investments, and that's in the line called structure, infrastructure and parks.
Okay, so the principal is being repaid out of our general fund.
Currently, however, in the model, it shows that the revenues that we're getting, the property tax increment, will be paid back for the COP investments, and that, as well as the GID as well. That was an intergovernmental agreement that was set up to help repay the city for those investments.
Okay. Now, we took on in like 2014 or 2015, about 40 million in COPs, correct? Roughly.
Yep.
And didn't we spend about 30 million of just general city money to buy the property?
Correct.
So that was like $70 million worth of just general city funds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are we going to get the $30 million that bought the property paid back to the general fund?
Yes, as the chart shows, the revenues that come in will gradually pay back on those investments. And the GID is a big component of that.
Except the GID is only for that thing. It's not for the city.
Well, the agreement states that we can use those revenues to repay the city back for that investment, as well as the property tax increment.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anything else? Thank you for a thorough discussion. It was great to see everything in black and white, and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, that brings us to our city council study session and city council reports. Counselor Ozadi, anything? Counselor Baker? Mayor Pro Tem?
On Wednesday, I attended the Inclusivity Board, and so they had Lance Johnson there who gave a recap on the renaming of the parks process that was put in place pretty recently. The first park that, if you recall, that went through that process is the Tom Romans-Berger Fields at Countryside Ballpark. There is currently one that will be brought back to council. And so part of that process is that goes to Parks and Rec, and then it goes to Inclusivity, and then ultimately that call is up to us. There have been some things, because again, new process, so there's gonna be tweaks to it, just like any other new process. And so my understanding is that went through the Parks and Rec Board, there was, their recommendation was for us to put a moratorium on that until they go through that process. Inclusivity did the same. I will tell you, some of the comments that came out of there were disappointing, because it was basically, you know, so far we're not showing inclusivity because all we've renamed things for are old white people. To me, that's not inclusive or equitable, and we shouldn't be judging things based off of people's skin color. It should be based off of merit of people's actions, and that's what most of the parks have been named after, is people who did something specifically in the community. I'm all for making sure that there's not barriers to our process, keeping anybody of any demographic from being able to be recognized for their commitment or contributions to our community. That's my personal opinion, but I wanted to at least share that, because I think, you know, we're sitting in an inclusivity board meeting, and I think that's, you know, doesn't drive to equity in our community and fix the challenges of the past of our country. So that is going to be coming forward. The other thing that I wanted to mention that came out of the Inclusivity Board that was concerning to me this last meeting was, so they have opportunity where people share things that are going on in the community that they participate in. And obviously you got to think people who are passionate about inclusivity, you know, do a lot of different things in the community in inclusive areas. Alan Farb is one of the members there, and I think we all know Alan very well. He was sharing about and I've shared about this before with the Legacy Foundation, that they have a task force that is around homelessness, and I believe Councilor Zadi, you might participate in that, which is great for the Legacy, but he shared the perception that that group is going to be presenting to City Council and get city leadership involved, and to me, there's a clear separation between what the Legacy work does as a foundation, because they're their own thing, not that there isn't crossover, versus what City Council does. But I wanted to at least bring it up to the group, because my understanding of our work as a city entity with homelessness in our efforts around that, although important, aren't the same as Legacy. And I don't recall an expectation that we asked Legacy Foundation to go do research for the city. So I wanted to at least bring that up and see if I'm off, or if, you know, it seems like, what I had brought up before when I heard about them having a homelessness task force, to make sure that there's delineation between their work and our work. Not that they're not both important.
Yeah, so there has been deep and heavy discussions multiple times in that group that this is not a city thing. Like any group, I think maybe one or two times it was like, hey, maybe we can ask the city if they can help with this or that. But there is nothing coming forward. We never made any decision about, there's nothing, we're way too early to even talk about asking for anything. So I'm not sure what that was, but there's a consensus within the group that this is outside of the city. This group is just trying to gather data, figure out where we can focus in on and support and do something for the community to resolve that issue of the unhoused. But there's nothing about approval from the city or anything like that.
That's good to hear, but I mean, I probably would have just addressed it with the Legacy Board, except for the fact it came up in one of our boards, which is, you know, there we do have guests who listen online and they, publish that. So I wanted to bring it up tonight, and then I planned on bringing it up again in the legacy next time we have a legacy board meeting. But if nothing else, to give you guys a heads up if somebody was listening and thinks that is something that is happening from our end. Again, important, and I'm glad that there's people passionate about it and are taking every avenue and leaving no stone unturned. But I want to make sure that we're everybody's kind of on the same page. I think that's important so that we all are as effective as possible. But that was the only thing I had. But it was kind of a interesting meeting.
Councilor Mel?
So I attended the DRCOG board retreat on Saturday, and that was actually fun.
I've
So-
heard that several times, so this has been a good meeting.
Yeah, just had a lot of good information. They went over demographics. They had root policy present on just housing overall, and then we talked about apparently the bill that shall not be named is what it was called, and had a debrief on that, kind of lessons learned, and then we also talked about TOD. And so the thing about the moving forward from SB 213, there was a desire from pretty much everybody there that DRCOG actually take more of the planning lead in terms of doing a regional housing analysis and strategy, because one, they're equipped to do so, two, they can actually pull together stakeholders and have the intention of doing that versus what we saw happen. And so that was one of the comments back to them, is like, let's include CML, let's include CCA, or forgetting all the acronyms at the moment. But that was the desire, to kind of have everybody pull together and actually have a process and a plan that was inclusive and representative of our communities. And it wouldn't, we still have to talk more about it in terms of what could it be. That'll probably be our next work session. But they wanted to just get a feel. So that was the direction everybody went. The other thing that was kind of fun to see is that they presented on transit-oriented development, and Westminster was highlighted. And so our staff, we had a lot of accolades to our staff to get information over to, since Deborah Baskett was going to present, to Chris Chauvin over at Adams County, and he really appreciated how our staff worked with him to get everything over for the presentation. But it was really nice to be represented from in front of all the other communities in terms of the work that we've been doing. And Westminster Station was definitely a highlight there, and so yeah, it was a good Westminster day at DRCOG. That's kind of it. Then there was Mother's Day, so
Well, hopefully that was good.
Yeah, hopefully you weren't busy. Like, you get to relax, right?
Oh, last week was busy. I had AC Rep lunch, and as discussed, they've left. But the demographer is always wonderful. She so knows her stuff. She doesn't have to look at any notes. She makes it 101 too, so that you are understanding. She's a great speaker. So that was a great luncheon. Had the Chamber Awards dinner Saturday night. Always fun to see, and surprised Tracy Kraft Tharp, who had been one of our state representatives. She's now a commissioner in Jeffco. Watched her face, and it wasn't until the very end she knew it was her, and she was blown away. So that's just always fun. We had flag raising at the PD last week. Officer Memorial Day is today, and I know one of our officers was on his bike for 250 miles for Officer Vankoff, and Police Week is the 14th through the 20th, so I've been putting out on my Facebook, find a police officer to say thank you to. We had Northwest mayors and commissioners, and it was a day to say goodbye to Deborah Baskett, and I am anxiously awaiting and hope things are going quickly to get my left and right hand for those transportation meetings. She did, I worked with her the first 10 years when she was in Broomfield, so I knew her very well there. And then when I came back here and she's here, it was great. Boulder County made a sign, and on one side was all of the cities along US 36, and then on the other side was the picture from our trip to DC this year. So it was nice. She was surprised. We had the 40th anniversary of the North Metro Arts Alliance at the library, and they also had the, what are they calling the events in the evening at College Hill? Play and Park? Park and Play?
Neighborhood visits?
Yes, neighborhood something.
I'll speak about it here in a
Oh,
second.
okay, anyway, it was getting a little rainy. They had one person that had come from the art thing, so they looked at the sky and didn't think it was gonna last very long. But the week before, they had 60 people. And then today had the CML spring meeting, and our Teresa was there, took great notes. The bills, some of them attached from last year's bills. They did them in the last 6 days. Now they're looking at everything and there's conflicting things. So stay tuned because there's a mess out there. And it took them an hour and a half to just give us a skim of what has happened. So I appreciated Teresa being there. There's things like the website. I had forgotten that the website has to be ADA. There's parts of our state that if they don't have an ADA compliant, and think of some of their older cities, they maybe have steps leading up to their door, and if they're not ADA compliant, they can't have their meetings. So just interesting how all of these bills affect everybody. Also, for council, we had Councilor Baker ask us for numbers from 1990, and City Manager Freitag said that it was going to take more than 4 hours, so we need to give direction. Do you want staff to try to find all these numbers from 1990, or what?
I will withdraw the request,
Oh, okay.
though I would like to know if finding the components to the cost to make a kilogallon of water would take more than 3 hours.
Certainly do some research and find out. I'll get back with you.
Because I would like that number.
Okay. Those are the things I had on my list. What do you have on your list, sir?
All right, Mayor, we've got some slides here, so if we can get those slides up. Next slide, please. So Mayor Pro Tem, councilors, community members, staff members in attendance, anybody watching online, quick couple things. So city update, we've already mentioned this evening the housing needs assessment, and so economic development will be issuing a request for qualifications here in the near future. The purpose there is to select a consultant or to start the process to select a consultant to aid the city in updating our housing needs assessment. And what that needs assessment will do it will inventory the housing supply in the community, certainly the availability, any trends and analysis, gaps identified, and then recommendations for best practices. And so that's a great information resource for us as we move forward in development in the community. Next thing, Mayor, you were just mentioning the Neighborhood Nights. This is a new community engagement initiative. The city hosts it every Friday night through September, started here in May, and it just kind of bounces around the community. Art a la carte, which offers arts and culture-related activities. The Park and Play, which offers lawn games. The Wild Wagon, which offers nature activities, and then Library to Go are all part of that weekly programming. The first night, as the mayor mentioned, May 5th, we had about 60 people in attendance, and so we encourage folks to come out and participate in that on a weekly basis. Next slide. Some Westy wins, so great news for our downtown and the Congress for the New Urbanism Charter Awards. represent the world's preeminent award for urban design, placemaking, and community building. And so they have recognized downtown Westminster as an exemplary achievement with a merit award in the neighborhood, district, and corridor category. So great news there. The awards jury recognized that the high-quality mall redevelopment for being driven by the municipality to create real downtown and social cultural center for suburban community. And so we're very proud of that recognition, and I think what you heard tonight is certainly testament to that. And then the first green field trips. And so you'll see some photos on the right there, but 2 of our Mesa Elementary 5th grade classes visited Legacy Ridge Golf Course and the Walnut Creek Golf Preserve. They learned about economic, recreational, and environmental benefits to golf courses. And we had a total of about 120 students that participated in the field trip, and this was organized in collaboration with the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America's STEM Learning Program. And so a great event, and again, you know, impacting that next generation. Next slide. Some things to know. So this Thursday night, and this is important certainly for the council, but more importantly for the community. If you want to come talk to the City Council, you can do that on Thursday evening, May 18th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. The location is the Orchard Park Academy at 7395 Zuni Street. So look forward to a nice turnout there. Neighborhood Nights, as I mentioned, it's coming up this Friday, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., and it's at College Hill Library. Saturday morning, Armed Forces Day Ceremony, Saturday, May 20th, 10 to 11 a.m., and that's at the Tribute Garden. And then our next City Council meeting is next Monday, 6:30 p.m., here in City Hall Council Chambers. Next slide. There was an information-only paper for the council on VIA Mobility Services. Just an update. Next slide. And as always, the city wants to be accessible, responsive, and transparent, and certainly accountable. If you have a question, comment, concern, good idea, please give us a call, 303-658-2006. You can email me directly at mfreitag@cityofwestminster.us. I will respond. And you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. You can check us out on Instagram, or you can ring our bell at next door. Pending any questions, that's all I have this evening.
Yes, on the housing needs assessment that we'll be doing, are we going to recreate the same report structure that we already have, or are we looking to expand it to kind of catch up with what everybody's kind of doing now with the housing needs assessments, getting a little bit deeper into average median income and understanding how that matches up with you know, availability of housing stock, pricing of housing stock. I'd like us to kind of get a little bit further ahead and a little finer grain with our.
And I'm not sure what we currently have as our standard, but I can certainly have Economic Development Director Kimball follow up and just tell you what we've got lined up, you know, and then if there's any other, you know, new ways of doing it, we're certainly open to those. I'm just not aware of what they may be.
Yeah, I think we last did it in like 2016. I think Root Policy did it at that time. But I think it would, yeah, let's just not regurgitate what we had, but let's try and up it to, I know even 213 had a description of what the housing needs assessments would have required, and that might be a good place to look and just check to see if there are some additional things that we want to address. Knowing kind of where the state's going and what was, you know, there was a lot of input from affordable housing advocates and our regulators, so just want to make sure we're getting ahead there.
Okay, thank you. Will do.
Councilor Baker?
What are we going to use that for?
What
What are we going to use the housing needs assessment for?
I think we go back a couple slides here. It's listed out. I really think what that does is that gives you the ability to understand what you currently have and where your gaps are, and so that then as you're trying to recruit developers to come in and build projects, you can then target those gaps. So I think that's really, it's a future development for housing needs in our community. Where are your gaps? And then, you have the knowledge base to go after certain particular niche areas or venues to kind of round out the portfolio of the community.
Hasn't our really comprehensive plan really already defined that?
I think to a degree, but maybe not to the level of detail that the assessment will provide you. Because remember, a comprehensive plan is so largely focused across the entire community. And this will provide us some fidelity in certain areas, looking at affordable housing, attainable housing, looking at locations of those across the city.
Isn't that already defined in the comprehensive plan?
Yep, in generalities, yes.
We don't assign affordability to any particular land use. And the other thing too is we don't necessarily.
Well, I mean, we can't define affordability, can we?
Like, just like gonna call you Mayor Freitag, like City Manager Freitag said, it's also helping us identify, what types of development we might want to try and attract to the city. And if we need, for example, I think also just having an understanding of what our demographics need and how that relates to housing types. And that's another piece that our comp plan is not really gonna look at. We're just looking at densities in reality and in our comprehensive plan, but not looking at, are we trying to get more condos? Are we trying to get more townhomes? Or what do we need to meet the demographic changes that we're gonna have over time? And the fact that we're gonna have a lot of seniors on fixed incomes, and what does that entail?
Why as a city do we want to attract certain developers?
I'm not so sure we want to attract certain developers, but certain forms of housing, different types of housing. So if we find out that we have a shortfall in condominiums, for example, well, then we know that, when we're talking to developers and they're asking, what does your community need? We can say, we really need to fill a gap on condominiums. We're short X number, for example.
Jump in.
Well, I mean, the other way that I look at it, and tell me if I'm wrong, is also are we too heavy in an area? So like if we're looking at like affordable in a particular area of the city, which is something that I've got plenty of complaint about in the past, are we doing too much affordable in one area, not enough in another area? Are we doing too much in general? Are we doing too much that's a certain AMI over something else? That way, if somebody brings us a project forward and we know it doesn't necessarily, it makes us more heavy on an area we're already heavy, maybe that's a project that we say, not in that form or something like that. So sometimes it's, do we have too much of something as well? This is the way I look at it. Would that be an incorrect way that we would use that?
Well, that'd be a fair assessment.
Mayor, may I add also, we have a housing needs assessment in place, but it's very out of date now. So now your staff and your policymakers or suggesters to you don't have current information with which to advise you or to answer your questions when you ask us these exact kinds of
14,
questions.
Is that right?
At best, yeah. So we're now finding that we don't have the information to provide you with the answer to a lot of your questions. And so this will give us an update. And I have confirmed from staff here that it will include, addressing the bigger issues and the emerging things that other communities around us are paying attention to that we don't have any data on at all.
Great, thank you.
It's just that I view those as very subjective.
May I suggest we would provide City Council with that study once it's completed, and you would be able to take that data yourself and make assessments as to its usefulness or not to your deliberations.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but to me, that all the data to some extent is subjective that we're going to look at. I mean, that's why to me, it's important that you have 7 members who are being vocal about what they feel the voters put you here to do, because at the end of the day, we have to take out of that assessment whether you think it's not enough or I might think it's too much or whatever it is, and be able to advocate from that. But I mean, it's a good starting point in my mind. That's also takes into account the actual market. It's what's the actual needs. And so like if you take something like seniors, for example, they're gonna look at how many seniors do we have now? What opportunities do they have once they, stop working, when we follow the demographics, and be able to try to be ahead of the curve instead of being reactive. We're trying to be proactive in some areas. So I don't disagree. I mean, any of it's really can be subjective, but I mean, there are some actual market-driven things that they're gonna put into that we have to decide whether or not we think they're making the right assumptions.
Mayor, perhaps this will help. We are planning on bringing an information-only memo on this exact topic to you on June 12th. That'll be in your packet. It'll have a lot more information. Apologize for not having it all for you tonight, but we'll have all of that. And I would like to clarify that the last study was done in 2017.
17.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just that I find these things to be completely subjective, and that's what council should do. And my great reservation about having an expert do it is they bias the discussion.
I think that you're missing the point of the data. You need the data so that you can then make a subjective choice about, do we want more affordable? Do we want more affordable, on the north side of town versus the south side of town? Do we want more condominiums? If you don't know how many condominiums that you currently have, the just base stock number of condominiums in the city, how can you make a decision about do you want more or less? You gotta have a starting point. And so I think that's what the needs assessment does. It gives you that data point and then says that, for a city your size in the state of Colorado, you've got a gap compared to other communities that you may want to take a look at. You may want to expand on.
I think it's almost impossible to isolate us from the rest of the metro area. We can, there are city boundary lines around this city, but that means nothing to the market, does it?
No, but I mean, if you look at the old study, it's based off of the market in 2017. So if you look at the market, what was affordable in 2017 versus today's economic
Reality.
yeah,
Reality.
we don't have that data. So I want to know that data so I can say, okay, even if you look at what it costs somebody to go to the grocery store in 2017 versus today, and then you mix that with what they're having to pay in either rent or a mortgage payment. We need to know that. Otherwise, we're not going to know what kind of, product we want to approve when, we have people bringing projects forward, in my mind. So I think to me, it's really useful.
What, do we as a council designate affordability of projects?
Do we not ask when a developer comes, what's the price point of this project going to be? I mean, we certainly do that. I think that's something that's been asked in any single, hearing over a development since I've been on council. I mean, you want to know what kind of product they're bringing forward.
Except that changes as the market changes. There is no missing middle, because the middle changes with the price of things.
The missing
Doesn't
middle
have a
moved.
definitive. But anyway,
Just to add on, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem. And this housing needs assessment is actually more objective, right? It's a data point,
how is it objective?
It's data.
because it's data. It's not a comprehensive plan is long-term. It's guiding growth. It's guiding the future of the city from a broad scope. That's more subjective because there are a lot of synthesis that the seven of us need to make. So we synthesize housing needs, we synthesize water plan, all the various plans we have typically are inputs into the comprehensive plan. Then you get to make a subjective, okay, based on what I know, here's where I would like the growth of the city to be. But the data that goes into it, those are not subjective. That's data. That's looking at the
Well,
way things
I
are.
disagree, but I'm alone, so let's move on.
I just wanted to say thanks for the update we got on VIA, and it was good to see the numbers keep going up, and we're getting people to grocery stores and whatever their needs are, so that's great.
Okay, you're welcome, Mayor. Okay, Mayor, if it's all right, we're gonna move on to our presentation for this evening. So this is the water treatment plant on Westminster Boulevard, the financing plan. And as I mentioned, You know, we're looking at this holistically at the 10,000-foot level. We're gonna walk you through that plan, and I'm gonna turn it over to Deputy City Manager Andrews, who will start the presentation, and he'll be assisted by Deputy City Manager Dorr. So gentlemen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Freitag. We're Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer, and I, Jody Andrews, are going to co-present tonight, walk you through the slides. If you could hold, as the earlier session with Wida, if you could hold your questions until the end, we'll make sure that we leave room at the end to answer those. And some of those may be answered as we go through the presentation. So to begin with, just a quick review of our agenda tonight. We're going to provide some background for you on the financing plan and how we're heading towards that and the need for it with respect to the Westminster Boulevard water treatment plant. You're going to receive a staff recommendation from us on the financing plan, and we're going to talk as part of that about the due diligence analysis that has been performed, and then seek a direction tonight, a decision really from you to proceed either with the plan as described by staff or to alter it in some way that you would be seeking to do. Next slide, if I could have. See, so all the other staff are pressing their own buttons here, but the deputies are not going to do that tonight. So Kate, thank you for doing that. Okay, this is a recap of where we are today with respect to what we're seeking from you. So this presentation will provide you with that recommended financing plan. And the financing plan presented tonight is strictly for the new water treatment facility on Westminster Boulevard. So it does not include the rest of the water utility. It's just only for the water treatment facility on Westminster Boulevard. And I would note that does include the necessary rehabilitations to the Semper water treatment plant that we've discussed on many occasions. This plan supports an estimated cost of $196 million for that Westminster Boulevard plant and Semper upgrades. And at the right point in time, you will be given the opportunity to decide as to whether or not you would wish to add approximately $15 to $20 million to that price to enhance water treatment capabilities at the new facility, with the addition of ozone treatment, which would primarily target water that's been impacted by fire in our watersheds. That's a future point in time, but we want to make sure that you understand that in the financing plan before you tonight, that option is preserved in the numbers that you'll see, so you have that choice set up for you, whichever direction you would direct us to do. And tonight, we're going to specifically talk to you, and this is where Mr. Dorr will provide much more detail, is the mix that we're seeking on the financing for that 196 plus potential 15 to 20. It's a mix of grants, debt financing, and cash on hand. So pending your direction and decision tonight, we will then return with funding source allocations to provide you with the most cost-effective plan based on market conditions. And of course, our team and our outside experts are monitoring those very carefully. They are shifting with much more action expected shortly. So we will make sure that anything we bring forward to you is responsive to the latest market conditions. Thank you. So just a recap, and this is very important because this comes up in our community, and we want to make very clear tonight that the rate structure that City Council has already put into effect for 2023 includes the correct financing levels that are presented to you tonight in the financing plan. And of course, this body will very well recall the very strong direction provided to staff to reduce water rates in 2022, as well as increase the limits for those rates per tier. So in other words, not only reduce the rate structure across all our water user or ratepayer tiers, but to broaden those tiers so that those even higher rates at the later tiers kick in later for people. So they got relief in two ways, one on the rate itself, and then one on the monthly allowance that they were allowed to have before that a higher rate kicked in. So those sweeping rate reductions went into effect in 2022, and then this council made modest, effectively cost of inflation, less than cost of inflation increases for 2023, and those are reflected at the far right of the table. Still, with those modest 23 increases, which are now in effect, you still see great reductions over the 2021 rates that you started with. So we still see all ratepayers having relief in 23 and a financing plan that's built on these rates for the new water treatment facility. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to, the next slide will be handled by Mr. Dorr. He'll start to talk to you about the details of our financing plan.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Good evening, Larry Dorr, Deputy City Manager and Chief Financial Officer. We're coming to you tonight with a recommended financing plan for this water treatment facility. This recommendation is based on due diligence, which is underway and ongoing, analysis of the various financing options provided by key external stakeholders. And I'd like to introduce, in addition to numerous staff members, our three outside representatives here tonight. Ms. Kim Crawford. Yeah, thank you for waving. Special legal counsel to the city. She's an attorney with the law firm of Butler Snow. And also Ms. Penise Meeson. Penise, thank you. She's an environmental scientist with CDM Smith and helping us in our cost evaluation. And then also Mr. Jason Simmons. Mr. Simmons, good evening. He's a financial advisor to the city and senior managing director of Hilltop Securities. This team will help us evaluate all of the various functions within our due diligence. We anticipate that a combination of accumulated potential grant awards, debt funding, and cash will fulfill the vision to complete the facility financially. This was recently reviewed by Fitch Ratings and undertaken as though the financing was already in place and a burden to the utility, but also an asset to continue to produce water, which drives the revenue to the utility. And based on that, those hypothetical assumptions, Fitch confirmed its AA+ debt rating and a stable outlook for Westminster and the utility enterprise. So that's somewhat of a pre-credit review of what the utility would look like 2 years hence into the future, as though all of these actions were undertaken. So with that, next slide, please. What I want to do is describe how each of these 5 sources can contribute to the overall financing. So if you'd imagine that entire pie to be the 196 million, give or take, as Mr. Andrews described just a minute ago, we think that these are the potential sources of funds to make all of that happen. And first, pursuing 3% in grants. You see there congressionally directed spending / community project funding. We've submitted an application under these auspices. We've had great success in this already. Westminster received approval for federal parkway multimodal transportation improvements from 120th to 122nd in the amount of $3 million just this past December of 2022. The city's congressional delegation has asked for additional applications for future approvals, and we have submitted one at this time. There are 400 other applications along with ours, and potentially 60 of those will be awarded. We anticipate hearing next steps later this year in 2023, and we'll continue to evaluate the viability of those particular grants, but we will not stop there. We will continue to pursue any and all potential grants. We're working very closely with our lobbyists at the state and federal level to make sure that we're aware of any potential opportunities. No grant will be too small for us to pursue in these coming years in getting this water treatment facility done. So that may be as much as 3%. It may seem like a small percent, but when you consider it as 3% of a very large number, that can have a real impact on this particular project. Next up, an estimated 27% state revolving fund loan. Again, these percentages of the total amount could move around, but we believe that there's at least this amount of funding available, if not slightly more. Let me talk just a little bit about what this fund is, who these people are, and our city's experience with the state revolving loan fund. First, they are able to provide an interest rate subsidy of about 20% below municipal market interest rates. So if a typical municipal market interest rate for a borrowing were to be 5%, 20% less than that is a 4% interest rate, showing that we can take advantage of a slightly lower yield overall. The state revolving fund process is governed by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, and most importantly, the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority, which is a component unit of the state that was established in 1981 for the purpose of being a conduit for EPA capitalization grants. That's how the CWRPDA is able to get this discount accomplished in interest rates. Since 1981, they have issued over 800 loans in excess of $3 billion, and in fact, 5 of those to the city of Westminster. Our city took out its first state revolving fund loan in 1997, and in fact, the Northwest Water Treatment Plant in Westminster was financed with a state revolving fund loan. So we have great experience with this particular source. They know our city, we know who they are, and we believe we have a great opportunity to take advantage of their processes and their funding. One of the things that we're evaluating with our engineers and our financial partners is the increased cost of meeting the requirements within the state revolving fund loans, and that is we have to comply with the Davis-Bacon Act, we have to comply with Build America, Buy America, and other requirements that are a function of this financing source. So we'll continue to evaluate the lower interest rate with the increasing cost of materials and labor. If it is your direction tonight, we will submit a loan application and begin working on that process over the next months in the rest of this year, and with hopefully meeting the application deadline of January of 2024. Once we've made that loan application and received a binding loan commitment that has all of the interest rate terms and conditions, we will be able to evaluate that versus other conventional sources and be able to make a more clear recommendation on whether or not this is a great opportunity or not for our utility. One of the more exciting functions that's happening in the state revolving fund loans is the potential for principal forgiveness. That is writing down the amount of money that's owed back to the state revolving fund loan program. We hope to achieve some of that. That will certainly add to the equation as we evaluate that, but no guarantees. The funding sources are ever evolving with the state revolving fund loan process. So again, seeking your direction on this financing plan, we will begin the application process. Working counterclockwise, you might have looked ahead that also we think that the United States Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act could provide loan funding for this particular project. We're going to evaluate that. We are already making connections in Washington, D.C. with the Environmental Protection Agency to understand their application processes, what it is they offer that's superior to municipal revenue bonds or other conventional sources. Just to give you a little background, the WIFIA, that's the acronym of the Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. The WIFIA was authorized in 2014 and reauthorized in 2018 and exists to expand funding by the EPA that supports its 1970s era establishments. So again, we have connections that we're building. We think this is a viable opportunity. What we've noticed is that the WIFIA loans tend to be longer term in nature, meaning more years to repay. They do offer interest-only terms. We'll evaluate those. Those may or may not be suitable for Westminster. They also offer payment deferral for typically growing utility, growing community. That may or may not be suitable for our city, but we want to leave no stone unturned as we think this could be a real chance. A next step is we will file an application with your direction that is due September 30th of 2023. By the way, both the WIFIA and the state revolving fund process will require some environmental evaluations. We will commence with those starting tomorrow, again with your direction. And finally, as a part of the WIFIA process, we're going to endeavor to learn more about the success that the city of Englewood, Colorado has had. They're the only city in our state that has closed a WIFIA loan, and we want to understand the strengths and weaknesses of that opportunity. We know that a Montrose, Colorado area water district is in the application process, as is the city of Greeley, and we'll reach out to try to understand how that might fit in the pie that's above here. But again, we need your direction to do that. And then finally, the very well understood experience that our city has had in municipal revenue bonds. We have underwriters under contract. We're going to talk to Jason and our financial advisor about whether or not we have the right number and right mix of underwriters to serve the needs of our city. We may need to add, delete, change. We'll evaluate that as we get closer to potentially issuing municipal revenue bonds. We know that we could issue, the borrowing capacity of our utility is up to the full amount of the project cost. So even if these sources aren't desirable and appealing, we will still be able to fall back on municipal revenue bonds, and we'll continue to evaluate that with Hilltop Securities and our potential underwriters. And then finally, we do pay-as-you-go financing as a utility. Cash is scarce. We want to have the right amount, not too much, not too little, on hand for accomplishing all of the projects that are within the capital plan of the utility. We may or may not use a mix of cash depending on forecasted interest rates and the terms and conditions that we might achieve in these other four main sources, of which we have a little control over what's happening in the market, and that'll certainly be another consideration. So with that, I think I'm ready for the next slide, and I'll return it to Mr. Andrews about some of the things we're seeing in capital planning and construction. Mr. Andrews?
Great, thanks, Larry. There's no slide number on this. This is slide number 6 out of a total of 8, so we only have a few slides left. There's a lot going on in this slide. It's intended to communicate primarily two things to you. One is how the design is going to progress over the next number of years into construction, all the way through to completion. And the second thing is at the very bottom in the gold to white boxes at the bottom, you'll see a design or cost refinement that will happen. So where we are now is right between April of last month, when you gave us the direction to proceed with the water treatment facility, and that is the council decision. At the time, we had a minus 15% to plus 30% accuracy on the number, the 196 million that we've talked to you about. I didn't mention it before, but for the community's benefit, that 196 million does reflect a reduction in the cost of this facility from the initial plans before council directed us to refine those plans and reduce the costs of the solution. That reflects a $100 million reduction. And so those numbers are all included in the numbers that Mr. Dorr described. But I wanted to make sure that the community didn't lose sight of that this is a very cost-effective facility that's moving forward. So April was the final decision. This summer through fall, we will be working through the 30% design level. So although we did have 30% design drawings for the earlier iteration, we are now rapidly going through refining and changing where we need to those designs. So this does not, if we were starting from scratch, we would not be at 30% design by summer or fall of this year. So I just wanted to make that point. Although we had achieved that level at the earlier project, we're now accelerating through this project to get to 30% design by fall of this year. The cost estimates at 30% design remain at a minus 15 to plus 30%. Throughout the winter of this year and into the spring of next, we will be achieving 60% design and also mobilizing on the site. So you'll see some activity out on the site, likely before the end of this year, as we mobilize and get the site prepared for activation, and you'll see us at the 60% design. At that point, our cost refinement starts to improve and narrow, and we're down to a minus 10% to a plus 25% at the 60% design level. So you can see that the lion's share of the work in 2024, the first 2 quarters, will be to get to 90%, which is in effect almost final design. And again, deepening or an intensifying of our site mobilization and a much further refinement of the cost, the final cost estimates to be closer to -5% to +10% on that total facility cost. Near the end of Q3, likely Q4 of 2024, we're going to come back to you with the final construction start decision, and it will be at that point that you will be presented with the bid alternate cost on the ozone treatment, whether you want to add that or not at that point in time. That would be the decision that's made. That's right, we're showing it as a red, green, yellow traffic light. And that would be the final decision that you would make before we launch into construction beginning in 2025. The construction will be quite intensive and progress through 25, all of 26, and all of 2027. So it's almost a 3-year or 36-month construction before we get to opening the facility in late winter of 27, early spring of 2028. And of course, at that time, we'll have reconciled all the costs, change orders, adds and redux from the final costing, and we'll be able to have and produce a final cost accounting for the facility. So any questions on that? We'll just have 2 more slides, and then you can ask us those as we after we've wrapped up. Next slide, please. So the next steps, there's only 2 remaining tonight. We're seeking a decision. Direction from you to approve the financing plan as Mr. Dorr has described, based on the content of what I described, so that the city can implement the most cost-effective financing mix, again, within the prevailing market conditions. And then our final slide tonight is next steps. We just wanted to let you know what would happen next after tonight. First step will be, of course, to retain legal counsel. The second we would bring back is to seek authorization for a reimbursement resolution, and then of course to approve the borrowing agreements for any of the debt elements of the financing plan.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation, Mayor. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
Councillor Mella?
For the revolving loan fund, does it, I'm assuming that if we take it, even though it's just a component of the financing, it would require the whole project to be the Davis-Bacon wages and all the sort of additional requirements, right?
That's our understanding presently, yes. We would want to get a binding loan commitment from the state first that sets forth all of those terms and conditions, but we're anticipating seeing that, yes, which means, so if there's just $1 borrowed from the state revolving fund loan process, then the entire project would have to be under that. Obviously, that would be extremely adverse to the city and just render it likely impossible. But if it involves, if it doesn't involve that and might involve principal loan forgiveness, then that would make that particular opportunity very desirable. But we will have the entire team evaluating that to figure out if that's the right thing. And our engineers, of course, will be helping us understand the cost escalation for labor and materials and so forth as it goes in, based on our percentage designs that we know about them at the time.
Okay. And would the same thing be required from with the wife? I don't know, the WIFIA?
Yeah, well, again, we only know of the one in Colorado at this time, but given as much as it involves Environmental Protection Agency funds, similar to the state revolving fund, we're anticipating that. So again, it could be difficult to find either one of those viable, just given the size of this project, but we really feel that the due diligence makes a lot of sense, because we're finding that these grantors are challenged to get subscribers, to get people to actually want to draw down their funds for the benefit of the taxpayers, the communities. So they're having to get a little bit more favorable, I'll just say, in terms of what's being offered. So, yeah. But we'll evaluate that when we get an actual loan commitment.
Okay. For the concept of the pay-as-you-go piece, not remembering there being, you know, in the spreadsheet that we had that showed all of our revenues and then our output and our water rates and everything, that model showed revenue going toward a, this financing project. So I'm just kind of curious to know, we had already had concerns about the $15 million annual allotment toward O&M being enough to maintain our $4 billion utility. And so are we thinking that we'd be pulling from that allowance, annual allowance, or are we finding some cash from?
Yeah, let me just comment on that sort of globally. You're talking about the financial plan of the entire utility
Yeah,
as it was,
yeah.
what Mr. Brian Donahue has presented to council a few times. And in those presentations, he had some different borrowings at different times for different projects within the scope of his entire capital plan that he presented. So a choice as to pay as you go or how much is utilized in cash for this project would have to be made in view of using more or less debt in the future. He's generally described a certain debt to cash ratio. Our utility has been 40-60 in the past, somewhere in that range. It might flip to 60-40 going forward. So we'll continue to evaluate each of those. And fortunately, we have the flexibility to do that because of the cash that's accumulated for pay-as-you-go projects. But those choices would not sacrifice any of those capital programs that Mr. Donahue has set forth in previous discussions. It would still remain at the level that he has projected going forward. Won't sacrifice that at all.
Okay, and one last question. The ozone, we're making the decision on the ozone at the very end of the design process. So does that mean that we're designing a project with and without it? And is that costing us extra to do?
So in effect, the ozone treatment will be put in the project documentation as a bid alternate and can be added in at the right time. Keeping in mind that one of the factors of the city council decision will be you can decide not to do that at that time, and it can be added in later. It's very scalable or addable, so it doesn't have to be. It's not integrated into the other treatment processes. It's in effect a bolt-on treatment process that will get a price for you if you choose to do so at the time. I would also emphasize that as part of that decision, you will of course be given information as to how much the new treatment plant will also process. It isn't that it's only the ozone treatment that will treat the water. The entire water treatment system will be enhanced, and so there will be good quality water produced for most conditions, and the ozone will be presented to you as a way to address some more severe impacts that we may see or may not see from fire in our key watersheds.
So it's kind of like we're leaving space for it in the design, then.
The facility footprint has room for this to be added on or not.
Right, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
To piggyback on that, my big question on that is, how does that fit into financing? Because I know, to me, that's one of the key things that potentially might really impact water quality if we were to hit one of those scenarios. But the other thing that's usually true in construction is we may get it cheaper up front. So how are we planning for that decision in the financing model, in the case that when you bring those decisions forward, city council says yes, that we're not impacting the model to a way that's gonna impact the ratepayers?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, if I could comment on that, Mr. Andrews. Absolutely, we will be evaluating the financial viability of adding that as an add-on as we go through. A change in interest rates, favorable 50 to 75 basis points, meaning 0.5% to 0.75%, could darn near pay for that particular project element with no impact whatsoever across the system. Conversely, if interest rates were to go up in the wrong direction, then we would have to very carefully value engineer, some of the elements that go in. So we'll be monitoring that really carefully and stepping into the financial borrowings pretty quickly through WIFIA and the State Revolving Loan Fund and frankly in revenue bonds as well to secure interest rates where they are, giving us the option to refinance if necessary, but lock in some part of the financing at current level of interest rates. Very difficult to predict where those might go. So we'll know more. You saw Mr. Andrews had the plus or minuses at the bottom of his graph as we go through design. In the next 18 to 24 months, that'll impact financing. Interest rates will impact financing as well. And even the operating revenue of the utility. If we, depending on the consumption of water, in the coming seasons, could drive a little bit of additional operating income beyond our projections that Mr. Donahue had, which could also drive council's choice to add that feature to the water treatment facility. So there are probably 4 or 5 major variables that could drive that we'll be keeping in mind as we get closer to that horizontal street light that you saw.
Good to hear. I think for me, one of the benefits of the project in general is the flexibility to make some of these decisions as well as how we can expand in the future. So I think that's always important to remind folks of some of those benefits of this plan. The other thing, and I know now's not the time, but I have to keep hammering this because I'd like to have the conversation at some point. You brought up about the rate structure changes that council did. The expectation always was that we come back and make sure that we adjusted them correctly when we talked about tier 2. And we did, in my mind, at least I did advocate, and I think the expectation was that we were gonna look closer at Thornton's model for the bigger lots. And I know that there were challenges around how our charter looks at that. The decision point was we don't have time to do that this summer without making it, or in order to make an impact. So I want to, at least put that on the radar that I still anticipate having that conversation unless, I don't have support.
Councilor Baker?
That price includes or does not include the $30 million we paid for the property?
Yeah, Sarah, would you care to comment on that?
Yes, it's all included.
So part of that 196 is the 30 million we paid for the property. Okay. Next question is, I know we have a contract with CDM Smith for $15 million because we just modified it. Where does that get us in the design?
Sarah Borgers, our interim director of Public Works and Utilities, joining us to answer some of these questions, Councilor Baker.
Absolutely. So what was approved by city council will get us to 100% design.
100% design. Okay, so that's good to know. So my next question is when do we have to borrow the money? Because if we're paid for 100% through design, according to the charts you showed us, we're paid all the way through 2024, correct?
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the council's actions tonight is to authorize the application process for the WIFIA loan with the Environmental Protection Agency and the State Revolving Fund loan with Colorado Water Resources. So we'd like to get a binding loan commitment from them in the first quarter of 2024 and be able to evaluate those terms and conditions, interest rates and so forth, and either choose to close on those borrowings during the year next year and have cash on hand to start committing to construction costs and construction contracts and so forth. We need to have the funding in hand before our utility could commit to construction, going horizontal and vertical. So we think the timing is sometime next year. That's one of the reasons one of these future council actions involves retaining legal counsel and authorizing a reimbursement resolution to allow potential borrowings to repay the utility, if I can say it that way, for cash that's already been outlaid for land and design and other things. So, depending on the terms and conditions, all of these borrowings could be taken down at once, sometime next year, or over the course of 1 to 2 or even 3 years as the construction is done in pieces, as Mr. Andrews presented.
Okay, and if we get a binding, the commitment that binds the lender, but does it bind us?
No, it's just binding the lender. We've gone through their application process and met all of their requirements in order to make that commitment. We then need to evaluate it in writing. We'll be spending money to evaluate cost escalation via Davis-Bacon and all the things, get legal advice and so forth. So it has to be a binding loan commitment. It would be presented to the city council and with a recommendation either in favor or not, and then we would move forward to close and commit to all the requirements.
Okay. Why wouldn't, were the estimates done with a Davis-Bacon Act understanding or without it? And there must be some rule of thumb, Davis-Bacon costs us 10% more.
So it was included without Davis-Bacon.
Okay.
So that would be if we were not using any, usually federal funding is what requires it.
And that would be both state and federal.
I
Well, the
believe just
WIFIA
federal
and the
funding.
RWPT GMQX.
Say that
The
one more time.
state- The state one in its alphabet,
Yes,
whatever.
yes, so the state does not, I don't believe,
We're not a
require,
prevailing wage
it does
state.
require Davis-Bacon.
The
Yeah,
state
that's what-
loans do, but the state of Colorado.
There you go.
Yeah, but they're loans from the state. So they have, so if we use either the state funds or the WIFIA funds, we must follow Davis-Bacon, and there'd be an upcharge because of that. Okay, but with both the state funds and the WIFIA funds, there is, well, the state funds has a 2% discount on the interest rate.
It's 20% of the total yield is the
Yeah, I'm sorry,
discount.
20% discount on the interest
So
rate.
that could be an offset or.
And the
it might not.
WIFIA funds has a possibility of principal forgiveness.
No, the state revolving fund has principal forgiveness. The WIFIA, we hope, has yet an even more aggressive interest rate than what we might achieve through the state revolving fund. We just don't know. There's just been the one example in Colorado.
Well, if we chose Davis-Bacon, why wouldn't we do 100% funding in, well, not 100%, but the full 81% in either state or the WIFIA?
Well, we don't, neither one of those will fund that much of this entire project.
So we're basically funding the max with the state and funding the max, and whatever's left over, we do a municipal bond for. And would we have to do all those at the same time, or because the building's over 3 years, we take 3-year loans? And
Well-
just gamble on the interest rate?
Yeah, well, we don't gamble, that's for sure, but we would make a measured estimate, of course, going forward. But we want to commit to construction projects where we have cash on hand or borrowings. We wouldn't be able to attract a constructor to commit all the mobilization and pre-acquisition of materials and et cetera without
So
our
in other
ability to
words, we
pay.
need to have the money when we sign the construction contract.
Yeah, I think we'll probably be signing phased construction contracts. That's yet to be determined. That comes down the road, but it might be a function of it. It could very well happen that way.
And we would look at those in the fall of '24?
Mid to late 24, I think. Yeah, probably. But
Okay.
council, of course, will be involved in all of the reviews and all of the approvals of any and all of those borrowing contracts and construction projects as well. Contracts.
And have we spent the, what, 7.5 million we basically set aside for this project from the ARPA funds? Or is that still in the bank?
We've just deposited that into the utility. Those funds haven't been spent, and I think we're doing it over a 3-year period. So no, those funds are all still there. Now, we have obviously taken down the land and spent some money on design. And I think those are from appropriations that occurred at some point in the past. So I would say that those ARPA funds are all still there, plus the general fund transferred in from general taxpayer funds, an additional $7.5 million. Those funds are sitting there as well. They're part of Mr. Donahue's model.
Right. I don't have any problem with having them apply for loans.
This was just a comment / question. Comment being, I really hope we achieve some of those negative numbers on the on the cost estimates, as we go, and to have that mentality as we're designing. Now, slightly counter to that, when we are constructing this building, designing it, are there any opportunities to, make it net zero or somehow really cheap to operate? And, I'm just kinda curious what we might be able to do there.
Yeah, so part of the pre-engineering work that was completed was actually to make this plant Envision certified. I don't recall off the top of my head what goal we were aiming for, but it's a infrastructure version of LEED is what that is. So we've already been looking at some options there, to the extent that it makes sense financially to do so.
Well, I get the Envision piece, but how does that relate? Well, I don't totally get Envision because I'm not sure how that relates back to our operating costs for the facility. Kind of.
Right, so I'm not Envision certified myself either, so I might be speaking a little too far out on a limb here, but a lot of it has to do with making sure that we're being efficient as possible, which reduces energy costs. There's also ways that we can reduce chemical expenses, those sorts of things. A lot of it has to do with building materials that we're choosing, and those sorts of items.
I could add, I am Envision certified. You do look, it's similar to LEED. There's a lot of parallels. So you do look at the operating energy costs, water use. All those elements go in to the design. So everything from, actually on Envision included also is an assessment of engagement, policy making in public meetings, those kinds of things are all factors, and it works all the way through to O&M decisions as part of the design, and what sometimes is referred to as value engineering is all done from the Envision framework, which includes operating costs.
Okay, so we're trying to hopefully find a balance between how much it costs to build versus how much it costs to run over time. Okay, well, I personally would just love to hear as we hit those, if we hit decision points, or if there are things in the design that we've been able to achieve for lower cost of operation, it'd be really helpful to know. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
To piggyback on that, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things and I mean, again, this is kind of not funding, but since we're on the topic, when you're looking at the opportunities for like how it's powered and LEED and all that, there's a big conversation around the resiliency, which is part of what we've talked about in general. But there's a big national conversation around, grids and how susceptible they are to different things that, in this fragile world we could see. So I would hope that would be part of the conversation too. I mean, we have a lot of, I don't know how realistic it is to use some of the newer technology that's not relying on the grid, that we're making our own energy perhaps. I don't know. I know, traditionally that stuff has increased the cost, which isn't really what we're trying to do, but I think it makes sense for it to at least be part of that conversation when they're looking at designs. But I wouldn't want it to be limited to just green. Resiliency is really important to me as we look at it.
The only thing I read that gave me concern was going up to 40 years for financing. I don't want to look at that. I'd have to know why you're gonna do that, if you're gonna do it. That was brings me way back where I sort of came into the whole thing, and they were looking at no less than 30 years. So just caught my eye, because you're obviously paying more interest rates for that many years. So I'm glad to have the FA here tonight. As we all know, they have a role. Our underwriter or underwriters, I said last time, this is a complicated thing, especially I think looking at if they go with some of these grants, and we have then other things that we have to go by, which could increase the costs and whatnot. Having worked in a bond house for 10 years, having on different boards I've been on, probably done at least 5 bond issues. Learned a lot, and when you don't have a few voices in there to give the client some different kinds of expertise, you don't always make the great decisions. So I just continue to say, I hope we have more than one voice as an underwriter, so. I think you have everything you want.
Do we have 4 thumbs up?
I didn't hear anybody say no.
No, okay, looking good. All right, thank you very much, Mayor.
Mayor, as we close this portion, I just wanted to highlight that professional person working in the lab is not clip art. That's Jessica Lewin, one of our chemists in the utility. So just wanted to flag that's one of our employees.
Looks like she's having fun.
She loves her job.
She legitimately does, it's not
Yep.
just the picture.
Yep.
What we got, Mayor?
And let's see, it's 8:39, we're done.
What happened to our clock?